Alright guys, it's time for a very long overdue damage report for Pokemon Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl. This is a video that I should have had done a very long time ago, and I just haven't gotten around to doing it. It's actually the first of 3 long overdue Pokemon videos I have to record in a row today. But anyway, the main reason that it took me so long to get through this was because I ended up not buying these games. You'll find out why in a minute. So, to get all my facts straight, I did want to at least watch a playthrough on YouTube, the same as I did with Sword and Shield, which I had a really hard time getting motivated to even get started just because I didn't really give a fuck. But I finally got around to finishing it, as well as a playthrough of Legends Arceus, which I'll be doing a damage report of also. But anyway, let's dive right in here on this. So, first and foremost, we gotta talk about the dex, which we knew was gonna be incomplete, but even I didn't expect it to be quite this bad. So, these games had the first 493 Pokemon in them, so Gens 1 through 4. And that's fucking all. So, there was no Gens 5 through 8 Pokemon whatsoever. There were no Megas, of course, no Z moves, no maxing. There was not even any regional variants. And that's new regional variants, old regional variants, any kind. As well as no new Mons or no new forms. Even for Dialga and Palkia, which Dialga and Palkia ended up getting new forms in Legends Arceus, and seeing how those looked, that might actually be a positive for these games. But they went extremely bare bones with the decks. Basically, the only things that are in this game that weren't in the originals on the DS were the alternate forms for Rotom, Giratina, and Shaman, which were introduced in Platinum. So it's slightly worse than what I was expecting. I didn't really expect them to have like many things past Gen 5. I was expecting them to at least have things that were like evolutionarily related. So things like Sylveon, and I was expecting them to put in at least the regional variants for, Alolan and Galarian forms. So the evolutions for things like, Berserker and Obstagoon and things like that. So I was expecting somewhere in the neighborhood of like 499 Pokemon. But they didn't even go that far. They excluded all the Alolan forms. They excluded all the Galarian forms. They did not introduce any new Sinnohan forms for anybody post Gen 5, which I never expected them to do, but that was one of the things I was hoping to see. So, extremely bare bones on the decks. Also, tied in with the decks, at least in my book anyway, is the moves. So, we got 328 moves removed in these games. Which, I hand counted those, so that might be off by 1 or 2, but it's in that neighborhood. This is compared to the 143, I think, they removed from Sword and Shield. And this also includes most of the new moves that they introduced in Sword and Shield, also being gone from these games. I think only 2 of the new Gen 8 moves were actually included in these games. So, massive removal on not only the Pokemon, but also the move pool as well. Now, setting all the deck stuff aside and going into the actual more meat of the game, I know people complain about the art style. I thought it was fine. I actually preferred this more so than some of the stuff they've been doing with some of the other Gen 8 games. I know it's chibi-ized and, it's a little different and some people aren't into that, but I thought it looked good. Honestly, at this point, my ideal Pokemon game would probably be like a HD 2D style game, like in the same vein as Octopath Traveler or Triangle Strategy or something like that. So we can go back to sprites and maybe get all the goddamn Pokemon back in the game. But visually, I thought everything was fine. Now, for platinum contents, there basically wasn't any, besides those handful of forms that I mentioned earlier. There was no Battle Frontier, there was no Distortion World episode, there was no villa for you to customize, there was no cameo by Looker. Basically, all the important things that people would care about from Platinum weren't really here. I did want to mention the Super Contest shows a little bit, because we knew that those were getting overhauled, and it looked like they were, going to change part of it and add in sort of like a rhythm game element to it. It turns out they pretty much just gutted them, and that little rhythm game is the entire contest now. So I thought that was a downgrade. I wasn't really a fan of that. I'm not a huge fan of rhythm games in general anyway. Also, Pal Park was replaced with something new, which, that's pretty obvious since Pal Park's original function is no longer necessary. So, Pal Park was replaced by a new area called Ramanas Park, which is probably pronounced Ramanas or something, but I think Ramanas is funnier, so that's what I'm going to call it. Which, basically, the function of that entire thing is just the obligatory, let's catch all the past legendary Pokemon thing that we've had since Oris. I think every game, at least one gen, or at least one game rather, in each gen has had that since then. So they use that for that, which is fine. I don't really have any issue with that. As far as trainer customization goes, it was very limited. They did do the thing where the entire outfits are one piece, so you can't, change like your shirt and your pants independently or anything like that. Also, there was only 12 outfits in total for you to choose from. One of which was the Platinum outfits, which was event exclusive, so there's actually only 11 in-game you can get without that event. So that was extremely limited, though I guess it is more than what we ended up with in the last remakes, which were Oris, which had zero customization whatsoever. They did also bring back single-use TMs, which was, how it was in the original DS games. Which this I don't actually have much of a problem with, because the main issue with single-use TMs in the old games were that some of them were only finitely available. So you could only get like one of some of them. I believe they've changed it in this game to where every single TM can be repeatably obtainable. So that was really my only issue with it. So as long as you can get multiples of each one, I'm not really bothered by that. The GTS was also still absent, just like in Sword and Shield. Some people thought it might be back since this was the games they were originally introduced in. Instead, the building is still there, but it was replaced with the Wonder Trade Station. So all you could do in it was Wonder Trades, and if you did want to do actual proper GTS trades, you still have to deal with their, home horse shit. Also, they made a few of the past mythical Pokemon obtainable in these games, and you have to unlock them by having save files from some of the other Switch Pokemon titles. So if you have a save file from the Let's Go games, then you can get Mew. And if you have a save file from Sword and Shield, you can get Jirachi. And then also after the fact, there's also an event for you to get Arceus if you have Pokemon Legends Arceus save file. So with this, I'm kind of mixed on it, because I like this idea, and I am very glad that they're making some of the older mythicals obtainable in a way that's not time limited, not tied to some limited event that's only available for a few weeks or whatever. Which is something that's long overdue, especially with how many mythicals that we have now. Which is, they kind of started that in Oris too, since you could get Deoxys in that game. But I'm glad to see them continuing that without it being tied to a limited thing that's easy to miss. I don't like the fact that it's tied to having to buy these other games that are shitty. But I guess the best solution for that would be to not make shitty games, which clearly is too much to ask. But anyway, One thing that I will give them credit for, but I think they're getting a little too much credit for this. The Pokemon League and the gym leaders all have rematches in these games. And when you rematch them, they do have significantly stronger teams than when you face them the first time. The Pokemon League, in fact, I think has multiple different teams. I think going all the way up to, I think, the upper 80s in levels, somewhere in that neighborhood. So that's neat that we can actually get some more difficult battles eventually, even though it's only a few of them. I think people are really overpraising that, though. People are acting like that's the greatest thing there's ever done, and actually, absolutely makes these games, some of the best they've ever made. That's a drastic exaggeration in my book, but it is a nice thing that they added, and I would like to see more of that in the future. Really anything to give any sort of a challenge to people who want it is a welcome addition. But then the last thing that I really wanted to mention here, this is kind of relevant now, it's not as relevant since it took me so fucking long to make this video. But these games came out on the 19th, but of course they leaked about a week or so beforehand, week and a half. Like every Pokemon game does. But that's not the funny part. The funny part is that they actually released a day -8 patch for these games, which is something I've never seen happen for any game. But people were playing the leaked copies, and they realized that there was content missing. The entire Raminass Park section you couldn't even get into in the post game. I think some of the music and stuff was missing. All the multiplayer features wouldn't function. It was missing quite a significant amount of content. So they went ahead and put the patch out ahead of time, since people already had the game ahead of when they were supposed to. So I just thought that was funny. I've never seen a day -8 patch before. People complain about the day 1 patches. Now we've moved on to getting patches before the fucking game even comes out. But the one part of that I do want to point out that actually is still relevant, that means that they launched the game unfinished. Which their definition of finished games and mine are clearly different anyway. But they released an unfinished product, which is something that Pokemon historically has been hesitant to do. And clearly they don't give a fuck anymore. Speaking of which, the home connectivity for these games, as well as Legends Arceus, took a very long time to actually come to fruition. In fact, they just recently got that implemented in a patch, I think last week. Week and a half ago. A few days ago, they finally released a patch for home in order to make them compatible with these games. So, see, I'm not the only one that's taking a ridiculously long amount of time to get their shit done. But anyway, my overall opinion on these games, I'd still rate them higher than Sword and Shield just because those games are a fucking mess. And 95% of this game is just copy and paste from the original Diamond and Pearl, which were good games. So, just by virtue of being remakes of a game from a better era, they're automatically ahead of Sword and Shield. But if I compare them to their originals, Diamond and Pearl on the DS, and by extension Platinum, there's not really a lot here to justify getting these over the originals. They added very little content. I mean, the games obviously come with all of the modern Pokemon things, both the good and the bad. By good, it's got quality of life things like, the nature changing mints and the bottle caps and super training and, shit like that. But then on the other hand, it also has the negatives like an incomplete national dex and the always online or always on EXP share. So it's kind of a wash in my opinion. But as far as actual new content, besides the new little features they've added to the underground, where you can catch some of the non-regional dex Pokemon. Outside of that, there wasn't really a huge amount of new things. Which these games, I will say that these games have the same issue that Oris did, where they don't end up being the definitive experience for their region. Oris had the issue of, missing vital things like the Battle Frontier and stuff from Emerald. But at least those games had a complete national dex for the time. They added in the new things like Mega Evolution, and they added in some more significant new content. So Oris on their own were standalone good entries, but there was still a reason to go back and play Emerald, even if they're... Oris pretty much replaced the original Ruby and Sapphire as far as like essential games you have to play. Really, the only reason to go back to those would be for nostalgia or just because you feel like it. So, Oris was a step up from the original Ruby and Sapphire, but because of the differences between those games and Emerald, they failed to be the definitive Hoenn experience. And I can say the same thing here for Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl, where they failed to be the definitive Sinnoh experience. But also beyond that, I would say that they didn't even advance very far over their originals whatsoever, and they're completely trounced by Pokemon Platinum. Pokemon Platinum, I would say without a doubt, is still the definitive Sinnoh experience, while a debate can be had between whether Oris or Emerald would be at the top of that list. So ultimately, like I said, I chose not to get these games. I really have no desire to deal with it. I still have my original copies of Diamond and Pearl sitting on a shelf right over there, as well as Platinum. So if I want to play any of those, I can. As far as recommendations goes, if you don't have the original Gen 4 games, and you don't want to deal with, tracking down an old expensive copy of a DS game, and potentially a DS or 3DS to play it on as well, and you have some big issue with emulating, and you just want a easily accessible Sinnoh-based Pokemon game, these wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. Like, if you get them and view them as a standalone thing, it's tolerable. But ultimately, if you can get your hands on or already have a copy of the Gen 4 games, whether it be a legitimate copy or an emulated one, then I think that would be the far better route to go, is to just play Platinum. But anyway, I guess that's all I got to say, so let's look to you and yours.